Hey guys, tonight we begin with the quiet terror of drained livestock, cold corpses, and something unseen stalking the edges of rural farms under a dark, humid sky. You're not in a city now. You're far from streetlights and traffic. You're standing in the middle of a field somewhere deep in the night, where even the crickets have stopped chirping, where silence isn't empty, it's listening. There's no scream, no fight, just animals found at dawn, their bodies oddly intact, but completely void of blood. And the only trace left behind? Tiny puncture marks on the neck and a chill that never quite leaves the bones. You probably wouldn't make it out of this one, not unless you locked every door, stayed out of the woods, and didn't dare flash your flashlight into the trees. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts slowly, as these things always do. A couple in the countryside finds their goats lying stiff in the pasture. No signs of struggle, no missing limbs, just wide, glassy eyes and dried, brittle fur. They call the vet. The vet scratches her head. No blood, none at all. Not on the ground, not in the veins. They run tests, no viruses, no parasites. Just empty vessels. And then the next night, it happens again. Not just to them. 3 other farms, same pattern. Goats, chickens, even a few dogs. No alarms tripped, no tracks left behind. The animals seem as if they just stopped living. And now the stories begin. It's not wolves tear, shred, and leave a mess. Not coyotes either, they don't drain their meals like Capri Suns. Someone mutters the word vampire, and everyone laughs, but no one really thinks it's funny. A neighbor says he saw something the other night, glowing red eyes low to the ground, moving fast between the trees. Another swears her barn lights flickered, and when she looked out the window, a tall, hunched figure with sharp spines along its back ducked behind her shed. She doesn't sleep much after that. No one does. And then the whispers begin. Chupacabra. You hear it from someone's uncle's friend, from a radio host on the AM band, from a nervous boy in class who insists his cousin's goats were taken too. It's not a word you grew up with, but it feels ancient, heavy, like it's been waiting a long time to be said again. You start locking your doors at night even though you live on a hill, even though you've never worried before. You stop letting the dog out alone. You check the coop before sunrise, heart tight in your chest. Nothing for now, but the air feels different, thicker, charged, like something is watching, not from far away, but from right there, just out of reach. You hear the stories grow. It's not just your town, it's happening elsewhere. Other farms, other animals. The same eerie pattern. No blood, no sound, no mess. The only consistent thing? Those 2 puncture marks. Like something knew exactly where to bite. And somehow, that's the worst part. Because whatever's doing this, it's smart, not savage, not wild, precise. There's no photo yet, no clear sketch, just a growing shape in the minds of everyone who's seen what's left behind. A silhouette that bends the wrong way, a shadow that shouldn't move that fast. And always, always that cold feeling when you turn around and see nothing there. It isn't just killing, it's taking something vital. Blood, yes, but more than that, peace, safety, sleep. And from this moment forward, that word Chupacabra won't just be a story. It'll be the explanation for every strange noise in the grass, every open gate, every unexplained death. Because you can't protect yourself from something you don't believe in. But now, you believe. You have to. And the worst part? It's just beginning. The island of Puerto Rico is where it truly begins to spiral. It's 1995, and something's not right in the town of Canovanas. Chickens are being found drained, goats turned to husks, dogs trembling in the corners of barns. The air itself feels like it's humming with something unspoken. People begin to whisper about it in shop lines, during lunch breaks, and at church. But when night falls, those whispers turn to silence. Because everyone's listening, Puerto Rico has always carried stories of spirits in the mountains, beasts in the rainforest, strange lights in the sky. But this is different. This one is present. It's not from another time or another generation. It's happening right now. Farmers wake to find their fences untouched, but their animals bloodless. No signs of predators. No bite patterns that match any known animal. And the pattern begins to take hold: only 2 puncture wounds. Never more. Neat, surgical, and completely, hauntingly quiet. It doesn't leave claw mark. It leaves questions. A woman named Madeline Tolentino steps forward. Her voice trembles, but she speaks with conviction. She says she saw it. She didn't want to. She wasn't looking for trouble. But it stood there, on 2 legs, just beyond her window. About 3 to 4 feet tall. Thin, gray-green skin, like a lizard's belly stretched over long limbs. Spikes along the back like quills or bones poking out from under the flesh. Glowing red eyes that didn't reflect the light, but seemed to generate it. And the face? Not human, not animal, alien. She says it didn't move like a beast. It looked at her like it recognized her. And then it vanished. Just like that. People don't laugh. They listen, because many have seen the same thing. They just didn't want to be the first to say it. The panic spreads quickly. By midsummer, over 150 animals across the region are reported dead in the same fashion. Police are overwhelmed. Veterinarians offer no explanation. Scientists mutter about viruses, rabies, disease, but no one's buying it, because viruses don't leave puncture wounds. Viruses don't walk upright. Viruses don't look at you with red, glowing eyes. And certainly not in groups of 1. There's always just one. One Chupacabra. Always watching. Always alone. Mayor Jose Quimo Soto decides he's had enough. He organizes a hunt. Not a cautious investigation. An armed search. Locals gather with flashlights, machetes, rifles marching through fields and dense jungle trails in search of the things stealing their livestock. But what they find instead is silence. No footprints. No blood trail. No torn fur or feathers. Nothing. Like it was never really there. Or maybe, like it's smarter than they are. And here's where the story starts shifting. Because fear is a powerful glue. And when enough people feel it at the same time, in the same way details begin to converge. Suddenly, the descriptions match. The red eyes, the spines, the bipedal stance. Some say it flies, others say it glides just above the ground, without leaving prints. Some say it emits a low hum, like a radio just out of tune. Others swear it disappears when light touches it. Every story adds another piece to the myth, and the creature becomes realer than before. But still, it doesn't hurt people. Not directly. Just the animals. Always the animals. And maybe that's what makes it worse. Because it's not hunting for food. It's hunting for something else. A message? A ritual? A pattern we're too human to understand? And remember, this isn't happening in the past. It's not some ancient campfire tale from the hills. This is 1995. There are camcorders, police reports, news anchors. You can watch the footage of locals holding dead goats up to the camera, voices trembling, faces pale, saying, "It drank all the blood. It left nothing behind. It didn't even break the bones." There are still scientists trying to explain it. Still skeptics calling it hysteria. But there's something about those empty farms, those stiffened bodies, those glowing eyes, that science can't quite hold in its hands. You don't explain something like this with a spreadsheet. You feel it. In your gut. In your neck hairs. In that second before sleep, when your body tenses for no reason at all. And on this island, in the summer of 1995, everyone feels it, because the Chupacabra has arrived, and it's not done yet. You'd think by now the fear would have peaked, that once the initial sightings passed, once the patrols stopped and the cameras faded, the story would fizzle out like so many others. But no. In Canovanas and beyond, the Chupacabra wasn't a passing headline. It was a presence, and one night in particular made that presence feel unmistakably real. It starts with a woman named Maria. She lives on the outskirts of town's simple home, surrounded by trees, with a low fence to keep her chickens in. She's not the type to scare easy. She grew up hearing stories about El Cuco, La Llorona, and the demons of El Yunque. But she always told her children, stories are stories. Nothing to fear if you show respect. Then one night, her dog won't stop barking, not growling. Barking a short, confused alarm, not scared, not angry, just warning. Maria gets up, peers through the window toward the chicken coop, and sees something. Not the shape of a man, not an animal. It's hunched, the way a spider might crouch just before leaping. The back is arched unnaturally, with thin spines along the ridge moving, like they're alive. Its head lifts, and those glowing red eyes blink sideways. She stumbles backward, knocks over a lamp, and by the time she looks again, it's gone. The chickens are silent, too silent. She waits for sunrise before checking, clutching her rosary the whole time. And when she does, every one of her chickens is lying still, untouched except for 2 small holes on the neck. Again, Maria's story travels quickly, but it's the details that people fixate on. The eyes, the back, the way it moved not like it was sneaking, but like it didn't need to hurry, as if nothing could stop it anyway. More people come forward. A boy riding his bike at dusk sees a figure leap from tree to tree. A truck driver claims a small, hairless creature stood in the middle of the road, then vanished as he blinked. A farmer reports missing goats, but no broken fences, no sound, no trace. They all mention the same thing. It didn't seem surprised to see me. It just watched. One report catches fire. A group of teenagers claim they cornered the creature in an abandoned shack on the hill. They say it screamed high, shrill, like metal scraping meadowland, then burst through the side of the building in a blur. No one got hurt, but they didn't chase it. One boy later said, "We were all frozen, like our bodies refused to move." At this point, even the skeptics start to go quiet, because too many stories are coming in. And they're not all the same, but they rhyme. The red eyes, the puncture wounds, the eerie silence before discovery, and the feeling that someone or something is watching you, that it already knows you're there, and worse, that it wants you to know. Not every sighting is dramatic. Some are just odd shapes in the fog, a strange rustling in the banana trees, a cold draft through a closed window. But that's the trick of it. The Chupacabra doesn't need to scare you outright. It just needs you to wonder what's out there, and from that moment on, it owns a corner of your mind. One woman tries to fight it. She installs cameras, motion sensors, extra floodlights, even a drone. She wants proof, but the cameras only glitch when the animals are taken. The motion sensors go off after the deed is done, and the drone, it goes missing entirely. She finds it 2 days later, perched in the trees like something dropped it there. The footage? Corrupted, except for one frame. One single frame, pulled from the glitch. A blur of gray, a suggestion of spines, and a dot of red dead center. She deletes it, and never speaks of the Chupacabra again. What's most chilling, though, is what doesn't happen. No one ever captures it. No one ever follows it to a den, or finds tracks that go more than a few feet. It's as if the creature doesn't live in the jungle, but passes through it, like a shadow slipping between places, stopping just long enough to feed, to scare, to be seen, and then vanish. And maybe that's the most frightening idea of all, that the Chupacabra isn't a monster in the woods. It's something else. Something that walks between stories, between dimensions, between our sense of what is real and what should not be. It doesn't live in the forest. It lives in the space between explanations. So the people of Canavanas do what people always do in the face of the unknown. They tell stories. They draw pictures. They pass down warnings. And every now and then, when a chicken goes quiet too suddenly, or the goats stare too long at something unseen, they look up into the trees, and they whisper the name again, Chupacabra. The descriptions start to pile up. Not just the names and fear, but the details. Because by now, the Chupacabra is no longer just a vague terror that strikes in the dark. It's got a face, a shape, a weight, enough consistency that drawings start surfacing all over Puerto Rico. And what those sketches show? It's not a wolf, not a jaguar, not a twisted coyote. No, it's something far stranger. It's short, only about 3 to 4 feet tall, but it stands upright. Its arms are long, ending in fingers that taper to dull claws. The legs are jointed like a kangaroo's, made for jumping or leaping. But the skin? That's what always gets people. Scaly, rubbery, gray-green like a lizard or a toad, with no visible fur, no warmth. And along the spine, from the top of the head down to the tailbone, spikes. Some say they're bones. Others say they're stiff hair, like quills. They don't move in the breeze, but when the creature shifts, they twitch, as if alive, as if aware. Then there's the head, oversized, domed, with large, dark ice or red ones, depending on the story. No visible mouth, until it opens. And when it does, it doesn't growl, it doesn't roar, it clicks, like a predator trying to locate you by sound. One person said it sounded like two stones tapping in a cave. Another claimed it made a high-pitched whine, like a machine powering up. No one ever forgets the sound. And yet, no two drawings are exactly the same. Some make it look like a reptile. Others give it a humanoid shape. A few lean into alien features, big black eyes, smooth skin, no visible nostrils. But all agree, it's not from here. That's the phrase you start to hear, whispered again and again. Not it's dangerous, not it's evil, not even it's killing my animals. Just, it's not from here, as if that explains everything. And in a way, it does. Because people can deal with wolves and wildcats, but something that doesn't belong, that doesn't fit the rules of nature, that's when legends become necessary. Because it's the only way to make sense of the impossible. Children begin drawing it at school. They give it wings, tails, glowing tongues. One kid draws it sitting on a roof, staring into his window. When asked why, he says, "It watches me sleep." He's 7, and he's not the only one. Parents start hearing strange things from their kids. Stories of creatures outside their windows, of red lights in the trees, of someone breathing in the walls. At first, it sounds like nightmares, but then the animals start dying again, and the nightmares feel like warnings. The police don't know what to do. They take reports. They offer advice: lock up your animals, install motion lights, sleep with a flashlight. But no one's caught it. No one's even seen it clearly except those first few witnesses. And every new report just deepens the riddle. Because the Chupacabra doesn't attack when expected. It doesn't follow a schedule. It comes when it wants to, and only when it's ready to be seen. Then something curious happens. A man finds strange footprints near his barn. They look like hooves, except too long, too narrow, like a deer's step blended with a lizard's drag. He casts them in plaster, but when he tries to show them to local officials, they crumble in his hands. No one believes him, but his animals are gone all the same. Even skeptics begin to pause, because this isn't a case of hysteria anymore. It's not just frightened farmers or kids with wild imaginations. It's growing. The story is stretching beyond one town, and the creature's features, the spines, the legs, the eyes, they're becoming fixed. Almost as if the more people describe it, the clearer it becomes, like a face emerging from fog, or a memory reconstructing itself from whispers. Some say that's how the Chupacabra feeds, not just on blood, but on belief, that every time someone draws it, tells a story, or dreams of red eyes in the dark, it gets stronger, sharper, more real, not a monster, but an idea with teeth, and in those early days, that idea is just starting to find its legs. It hasn't crossed borders yet. It hasn't become a global myth. But in Puerto Rico, it's already more than real. It's part of the landscape now. Something you build fences against. Something you double-check the locks for. Something that walks beside your flashlight beam as you move through the dark. Unseen, but close. So close. The story might have stayed an island telekept to whispers among Puerto Rican farmers and late-night callers to local radio shows if not for one strange twist of fate. Because what really sealed the legend's place in the world was a joke. One word, spoken on the right night, by the right voice, and suddenly the Chupacabra had a name that would never be forgotten. It happened during a news broadcast. A local comedian, Silverio Perez, went on the air to comment on the growing animal attack shaft, serious, half-teasing. The island was tense, confused, scared. So naturally, humor slipped in to make it easier to swallow. He looked into the camera and called the creature El Chupacabras, the goat sucker. And just like that, it stuck. The name was ridiculous. A little crude, definitely catchy. But strangely, it fit. The victims were goats, after all, among other things. And the nature of the attacks draining blood through clean, punctures lined up eerily well with the nickname. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't ancient, but it had teeth. You could say Chupacabra in a whisper or a shout, in fear, in jest, in disbelief. And either way, people would know exactly what you meant. Once the name took hold, the story moved faster. News anchors from the mainland started picking it up. Puerto Rico's goat sucker strikes again. Is a bloodthirsty cryptid on the loose? Locals blame livestock deaths on alien vampire creature. It was perfect for headlines. Short, punchy, exotic. And now, the story had a brand. It was no longer some creature on a small island. It was the Chupacabra, a cryptid, a mystery, a creature of the night with a name too strange to ignore. And with the name came attention. Journalists, skeptics, paranormal investigators, even tourists. They all came looking. Some wanted to solve the case. Others, they just wanted to say they'd been to the land of the Chupacabra. But no one left unchanged. Because even if you didn't see it, you felt it. Meanwhile, locals weren't laughing. They were still finding their animals dead. Still hearing things outside at night. Still waking up to find the gates closed, the locks untouched, but the pens empty. And now the creature had a name. And names have power. It showed up on t-shirts, coffee mugs, street art. Some artists turned it into a mascot bright-eyed, cartoonish, almost cute. But then someone's chickens died. And just like that, the laughter faded again. Because it wasn't a punchline in Canavanas. It was real. And naming it hadn't weakened the fear. If anything, it made it stronger. There's an old belief in folklore that once you name a thing, you give it structure, a form, a focus, a face. Before, it was a shadow. Now, it was a legend. Something that could walk into other towns, other countries, other stories. And that's exactly what it did. By the end of 1995, reports began surfacing in other parts of the island. Then Miami, then Mexico, then South Texas. Always the same pattern. Dead animals, drained blood, no sign of struggle. And always just behind the scenes, someone muttering the name under their breath like a curse. Chupacabra. But the creature itself? It stayed elusive. The drawings got weirder. The stories diverged. Some said it flew with bat-like wings. Others said it could vanish into mist. A few said it changed shape depending on who looked at it, like a reflection in warped glass. And through it all, the name stuck. El Chupacabras. Even as the creature's image shifted, even as details blurred, even as new versions popped up far from the jungles of Puerto Rico, the name carried the fear forward. A name you could whisper on a dare, or scream in the dark, or speak softly to someone who swore they saw something move just outside the chicken coop. Because once a legend gets a name, it doesn't stay quiet. It gets repeated. It gets summoned. It gets remembered. And by naming it, the world did something irreversible. It gave the creature permission to spread. And it listened. Oh, it listened. At first, people thought it was just goats. That's what the name said, after all. But the Chupacabra didn't seem to care much for branding. Because as time went on, it became clear it wasn't picky. Chickens started showing up dead, just like before. Cats, too. Dogs. Even a few cattle-strong animals. Large animals found slumped in the dirt without a drop of blood left in them. And that's when the mood shifted. This wasn't just a creepy island story anymore. It was a pattern, a method. And that method was getting bolder. The wounds were always the same. 2 holes, small, clean, like surgical instruments had been used, like the blood was siphoned out carefully, intentionally. Some animals showed signs of paralysis. Others had no external trauma at all. It was as if something had learned exactly how to harvest what it wanted without leaving a mess. That's not how animals kill. That's how scientists do, or surgeons, or something that's been studying us for a long, long time. And then, it happened. One man in the hills of Puerto Rico woke up to find his entire flock, over 20 chickens, dead in a perfect circle around the coop, each one drained, each one with those two tiny marks like they'd been tagged and taken. Not a single feather scattered, not a single gate opened, just a circle of silence. He moved away a week later, wouldn't talk about it. Other cases followed. Horses with shallow neck wounds, dogs found curled in corners, stiff and cold, no sign of injury until you looked close. Even rabbits' entire hutches cleared overnight, not a drop of blood on the ground. It was precise, almost ritualistic. And wherever it happened, the people said the same thing. There was no sound, not even barking, just stillness. Some began to suspect something worse. If it could take down a goat, then a dog. What about a person? That part stayed mostly unspoken, but you could feel it in the way people started bringing animals indoors at night, the way they put fresh salt across the doorways, the way they locked doors they hadn't locked in decades. One woman in rural Bayamon swore she saw it watching her from the tree line, not attacking, just standing, back arched, arms dangling, eyes burning like twin coals in the dark. She said it didn't flinch when she shone her flashlight on it. It just blinked, and then disappeared. Her animals were untouched that night, but the next night, every single one was gone. It's as if the Chupacabra was sending messages, not just killing to feed, killing to be seen, to be known, because once you knew its name, you became part of the pattern. And maybe that's why the attacks kept expanding. Because each new incident wasn't just a mystery, was an invitation to speculate, to fear, to retell. And with every retelling, the story grew stronger. Every goatsucker headline, every shaky interview, every child's crayon drawing of red eyes and spikes, they weren't just echoes, they were offerings. And the Chupacabra, it was listening. Soon, farmers began making connections. The deaths weren't random. They followed the wind, the storms, the power outages. Some claimed it only struck on moonless nights. Others insisted it followed certain frequencies that radio static could trigger it. And still others believed it could sense fear, that it tasted it. And if that's true, it must have feasted well, because fear was spreading faster than the blood was draining. Even the animals knew something was wrong. Dogs wouldn't go near the woods at night. Horses refused to step out of their stalls. And chickens? They'd huddle in corners, staring out into the dark as if waiting for something. Something that always came, and never made a sound. There was a theory that started to circulate quietly, among the most nervous, that the Chupacabra wasn't attacking for hunger, but for collection. That somewhere, in some hidden space, it was keeping everything it took. Blood, organs, energy, and building something. A nest? A weapon? A body? No one could say, but they all agreed. It wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because this wasn't about goats anymore. It never was. This was about something learning, evolving, and watching, always watching, from the trees, from the shadows, from the spaces between fences, waiting for the right night to come again. There comes a point when fear turns into action, when people decide that enough chickens, goats, and cattle have died, that enough strange things have gone bump in the night. That waiting isn't going to stop whatever's creeping through their fields under cover of darkness. And in Puerto Rico, that moment came hard. Because soon after the sightings surged, the people of Canavanesand, several other rural towns picked up their flashlights, machetes, and old hunting rifles and decided to hunt the thing. It wasn't just curiosity, it was protection. For their homes, their farms, their children. They'd grown up on stories of shape-shifting witches and night demons, but this felt new, and worse, it felt close. So they formed patrols, dozens of men in trucks and on foot, sweeping the jungle hills at dusk, scanning the brush for movement. They didn't expect to find a bear or a big cat. They were looking for something different, something wrong. The nights were filled with tension. People reported glowing eyes in the trees, sudden gusts of wind with no explanation, even the smell of copper in the air, sharp and bitter, like blood. One man claimed his radio shorted out just as they crossed a certain trailhead. Another swore he saw something leap from a tree, but when they reached the spot, nothing. No prints, no broken branches, just silence. And then one group heard the noise. A whine high-pitched mechanical, like a dentist drill, winding up in slow motion. It came from all around them, then stopped. In the morning, they found 3 of their hunting dogs dead. No blood, no wounds, just still, as if something had passed through them and taken something on the way. The mayor of Canavanas, Chimo Soto, even joined in. Wearing camouflage and clutching a shotgun, he told reporters he was going to catch the creature himself. He took the legend seriously. And why not? By then, over 200 animals were confirmed dead across the island. Bloodless, unmarked, unexplained. But despite all the hunts, the stakeouts, the late-night marches through tangled forest, no one ever caught it. They never even got a clear picture. The few photographs taken during those sweeps showed nothing but shadows, half-formed shapes, sometimes just blurs, or eye-shiny 2 tiny orbs reflecting the flash like distant coals. Always watching, people began saying that the Chupacabra couldn't be caught because it didn't live in the jungle. It just passed through it, that it came from somewhere else. A different layer of reality, a fold in the world. One that opened when conditions were just right, no moon, high humidity, maybe a spike in electromagnetic field sand then, there it was. And just as quickly, gone again. Some blamed the US military. Old rumors surfaced about hidden labs tucked away in the island's more remote regions, abandoned bunkers, jungle compounds with no public records, men in uniforms who spoke little and left quickly. Was the Chupacabra the result of an experiment? A weapon? A creature grown in secret and set loose by accident? Or maybe it escaped. And now? Now it was adapting, evolving, learning to avoid traps. But even those theories didn't fully explain it. Because this thing wasn't just elusive, it was intentional. It didn't wander into open areas. It didn't attack humans. It didn't leave behind fur or droppings or bones. It left fear, memory, a sense that it was almost real enough to touch. And maybe that's why the hunts always failed. Because they weren't tracking an animal. They were chasing a legend in motion. Yet even without a body, the fear was real. Farms began building higher fences. People installed floodlights. Some even moved into town, leaving behind decades of family land. All for fear of something they couldn't even prove existed. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of fear. The kind you can't shoot. The kind you can't catch. The kind that hides in doubt. Eventually, the official patrols ended. People got tired. Or scared. Or maybe they realized what others already suspected. That the Chupacabra wasn't a beast you could trap. It was a story with claws. And it was already in your head. Still, every now and then, someone would try again. A group of teenagers with night vision goggles. A YouTube cryptid hunter channel. Even a well-funded documentary crew. But they all came back with the same thing. Footsteps that led nowhere. Equipment that failed. And eyes that swore they saw something just for a second perched in a tree, or crossing a road, or watching from the field. Right before the lights blinked out. And the animals? They kept dying. Not every night. Not in every town. But enough. Enough to remind everyone that whatever they were looking for, it had never really left. The island wasn't enough. By late 1995 and into 1996, the stories of the Chupacabra began leaking out not through academic journals or scientific papers, but through something far more powerful. Word of mouth. And soon, the legend made landfall. Not just in the minds of those who'd grown up with Caribbean folktales, but in the fields of farmers across Mexico, the American Southwest, and parts of Central America. Wherever goats bled dry, wherever chickens were left cold and hollow-eyed in the dirt, there it was. That same name, that same uneasy whisper, Chupacabra. It wasn't long before the patterns started showing up again. Northern Mexico reported its first major wave of attacks near the city of Juarez. Farmers began waking to find their animals drained again. No blood, no struggle. Police were baffled. Local newspapers ran the headlines. And the descriptions? Well, now things started to shift. Because this Chupacabra wasn't quite the same. Gone were the spines. Gone were the glowing red eyes and kangaroo-like limbs. What people saw in Mexico looked more like a dog, but not quite. Hairless, thin, skin like leather stretched over bone, fangs too long for a normal snout. It ran on all fours fast, with an awkward, loping gait, as if its limbs didn't quite match. And the eyes? Not red this time, but hollow, pale, reflective, like headlights in the mist. People began calling it the Mexican Chupacabra. Same name, new shape. And just like before, it came without warning, left without trace, and fed on blood. From there, it jumped borders. Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. The pattern repeated again and again. Livestock drained. No blood. No predator tracks. No answers. And always a glimpse of something strange. Not a wolf. Not a coyote. Not anything from the books. But a shape that felt wrong. Too silent. Too quick. Too aware. Then came the photos. People started snapping grainy shots of what they believed to be the Chupacabra. It was always the same. A small, hairless creature. Canine-like. Sunken flanks. Long snout. And those teeth-long, yellow, curving outward like tiny ivory daggers. Some were roadkill. Others were caught in traps. People would hold up the bodies on camera and say, "See? This is it. This is what's been killing our animals." But the scientists? They weren't impressed. Biologists tested the carcasses. They ran DNA sequences, tooth comparisons, bone structure analysis. Their verdict? Canines, coyotes, dogs, sometimes hybrids with manja skin disease that makes animals lose their fur and look grotesque. Case closed, right? Except mange doesn't drain blood. Coyotes don't leave zero blood trails. And those bite marks? They never match known canine patterns. Too precise. Too narrow. Too clean. It was like something had surgically pierced a vein and taken exactly what it needed. And even stranger, some of the creatures found didn't match any known breed. One corpse had back legs longer than the front. Another had 6 toes on each paw. One even had an internal structure unlike any documented animal. Still, the scientists insisted, nothing to see here, just sick dogs. But the ranchers? They knew better, because their animals weren't dying from bites or scratches. They were dying from exsanguination. Complete blood loss. No trauma. No organs missing. No signs of panic. Just empty. Like a light bulb with the filament snapped. And the sightings kept spreading. Florida, California, Chile, Argentina. Wherever rural land met deep brush, people began whispering about eyes in the dark and cold bodies at dawn. Each time, the creature looked a little different. Sometimes canine, sometimes reptilian, sometimes a blur between the two. But the name stayed the same, Chupacabra. This new version sparked debates. Was it the same creature, evolving over time? Or a new species entirely? Was the original form a myth, and this, the real thing? Or were both real, operating in different regions? Some even claimed the creature could mimic forms, that it took on appearances suited to the land, the weather, the culture, like a shape that shifts depending on what you expect to see. Because if fear is a mirror, then the Chupacabra might just be your reflection, sharpened into fangs. But no matter the shape, the effect was always the same. Empty pens, shaking dogs, tired eyes that never fully slept again. Because once the Chupacabra came to town, it never really left. It just waited. For the next storm, the next night without moonlight, the next unlucky farmer who thought he heard something tapping at the fence. Just wind? Maybe. But you still lock the door, because you've heard the stories. And in places like these, stories have teeth. By the early 2000s, the Chupacabra had become something more than legend. It had become pop culture, not just in Puerto Rico, not just in Mexico or the borderlands, but everywhere. It was in comic books and horror films, on novelty mugs and keychains, even on animated TV shows where it popped out of bushes with googly eyes and cartoon fangs. The world had officially fallen in love with the goat sucker. But that love was complicated, because while the media ran with the mystery amplifying the name, turning it into late-night punchlines and cheesy movie monsters. People in rural areas were still waking up to cold barns and dead animals. The Chupacabra had gone mainstream, but it hadn't gone away. TV specials started airing with titles like Blood in the Brush, Chupacabra Uncovered, Hunting the Beast, Night with the Goat, Sucker, Alien Predator, or Hoax. Each one featured the same formula: shaky night vision cameras, dramatic music, and a handful of eyewitnesses recounting what they'd seen or almost seen. It was spooky. It was entertaining. And for many, it was deeply real. One episode featured a family from Texas. They'd lost several goats over the span of 3 months. Each time, the animals had been killed silently, no barking dogs, no signs of struggle. And each time, the bodies had been drained. A local vet confirmed exsanguination but couldn't explain how. The father set up trail cams, and on one of them, a blur, just for a second, low to the ground, thin, hairless, eye shine too high for a dog, too low for a deer. It was enough to send a chill, even through a TV screen. At the same time, websites and forums were beginning to crop up pearly internet communities dedicated to cryptids, conspiracy theories, and the unexplained. And in the middle of it all, a growing library of Chupacabra sightings. Users posted photos of hairless beasts, audio recordings of eerie clicks in the night, even crude maps showing the spread of the creature across the Americas. The digital age had given folklore a second life, and the Chupacabra, it was thriving. But here's the twist. As the stories spread, so did the versions. Some people described a kangaroo-like reptile with glowing eyes and spines. Others insisted it was a mutant coyote. Still others leaned into the extraterrestrial angle, claiming the creature had been dropped off by a UFO or was part of a hybrid program run by a shadowy government agency. The further the legend traveled, the less clear it became. But somehow, that helped. Because what better way to explain something impossible than to let it be all things at once? One cryptozoologist, a self-proclaimed monster scientist, suggested the Chupacabra was a mythical archetype, an image shaped by region, culture, fear. In Puerto Rico, it took the form of an alien-like creature because that's what the people were primed to see. In Texas, it appeared as a canine cryptid because that matched local predators. The Chupacabra, he argued, was a living projection, a folk manifestation. It wasn't about biology. It was about belief. And belief, as it turns out, doesn't need proof to survive. Of course, not everyone agreed. Scientists remained skeptical. Biologists insisted that nearly every Chupacabra photo could be traced back to coyotes with mange. They'd hold up side-by-side comparisons on the news. One image of a hairless, bug-eyed beast caught in a trap. One of a sick dog with skin disease. See? No mystery here. But even the most logical viewers couldn't deny. Something felt off. The size, the shape, the sheer number of reports, and the consistency of the fear. It wasn't just bad lighting or internet hysteria. Something was happening. And what's more, it kept happening. Every few months, new stories would emerge. Chickens drained in Mississippi, goats slaughtered in Honduras, dead cattle in Nevada with strange puncture wounds. Always the same pattern, always the same whisper. It must be the Chupacabra. At this point, the creature had outgrown even its name. Because while scientists argued and TV shows sensationalized, people in quiet corners of the world locked their barns just a little tighter and listened for the rustle, the hum, the sound of claws just beyond the flashlight's reach. Because whether it was alien or coyote, biological or folklore, the effect was real. The fear was real. And as long as animals turned up cold and dry under moonless skies, the Chupacabra lived on. Not in books, not on TV, but in the space between the trees, waiting. Let's step back a moment, because while the fear of the Chupacabra was spreading far and wide, something curious was happening in the background, something that didn't get as many headlines, but whispered just as loudly in the ears of those paying attention. People weren't just wondering what the Chupacabra was. They were starting to ask, why now? Why, after all these years, had such a strange and specific creature suddenly burst into the world's consciousness? Why this legend, at this time, in this shape? And that's when the theories started piling up. Some were simple. Folklore evolves. It travels, it mutates, it gets retold. They said the Chupacabra was just the newest member of a very old family, a descendant of blood-sucking beasts from centuries past, like the Bruja of Spanish legend, or the Alp from Germanic lore, or even the Strigoi of Eastern Europe. But this version? This one came wrapped in green skin and glowing eyes. Perfect for the age of aliens, tabloids, and television. Others took a more cosmic angle. They looked at the Chupacabra and didn't see a monster at all. They saw a signal, an omen. They pointed to the wave of UFO sightings happening around the same time in the 90s, particularly across Latin America. They pointed to reports of cattle mutilations in the US, eerily similar to Chupacabra attacks, with blood drained and organs removed, but no signs of trauma. They asked, what if this isn't folklore evolving, but something arriving? Something testing boundaries, studying us, harvesting. The alien theory found its strongest supporters in Puerto Rico. Remember, the island has long had its own history of UFO lore. Bright lights over El Yunque, saucer-shaped objects reported off the southern coast, strange metallic hums in the dead of night. People started linking those lights to the first Chupacabra sightings. Not a monster from the jungle, but a visitor, not here to terrorize, but to extract. One local theory became so popular it took on a life of its own, that the Chupacabra was a biological dronia creature engineered by extraterrestrials, dropped into rural areas to gather biological material, blood, cells, genetic information. It didn't kill for sport. It didn't even kill out of malice. It was collecting, a scout, and when it was done, it would return, disappear. Mission complete. The theory spread faster than the skeptics could keep up. Suddenly, late-night radio hosts were talking about the Chupacabra in the same breath as Roswell and the Men in Black. And people began treating sightings like encounters, not with an animal, but with a technology far beyond our understanding. Still others had a more spiritual theory. They believed the Chupacabra was a kind of guardian gone roguea creature born from nature itself, sent to punish humanity for its disregard of the earth. Some pointed to the rise in deforestation, pollution, and urban sprawl in the areas where sightings were most intense. Maybe, they said, the land was fighting back, not with floods or storms, but with fangs. Even more mystifying, the idea that the Chupacabra didn't come to us at all, that it had always been here, lurking on the edges of our awareness, that what we saw in 1995 wasn't a birth, but an awakening. Maybe something ancient stirred in the deep forests, provoked by some unknown foreseen echo of a creature we once knew, long ago, before the lights and the concrete pushed it into shadow. And maybe now, in a time of noise and chaos, it had decided to step back into the world, to remind us, to warn us. One of the strangest theories came from a linguist. She argued that the word Chupacabra itself had power, that naming something isn't just description, it's invitation, that once the word was spoken, repeated, feared, and passed on across mouths and minds, it became a vessel, a shape that had to be filled, and something someone answered. That's the thing about legends. They don't just reflect our world, they reveal what we're ready to see. And maybe, just maybe, the Chupacabra was the story we needed in that moment. A creature not of history, but of now. Of blood and fear and unanswered questions. Of spines and red eyes and tracks that vanish. Because let's face it, every age has its monster. The boogeyman wears different faces, but it always comes when we least expect. And in the 1990s, under flickering halogen lights and cheap TV static, ours wore spikes down its back, and a name that no one could quite say without glancing at the window afterward, just to check, just to be sure, that it hadn't arrived again. By the time the 2010s rolled around, something had shifted. The Chupacabra hadn't vanished, not exactly, but it had slipped from the breaking news section into something quieter, something older, a folk rhythm. Now, it wasn't just the new reports people listened to, it was the stories, told again and again, refined over backyard fires, whispered during power outages, scrawled into Reddit threads with eerie timestamps. Because when a monster survives the headlines, When it weathers skepticism, documentaries, and government denials, what's left is something even more powerful. A myth that settled in, and it had settled well. In Texas, a rancher's granddaughter would tell you how her abuela used to leave salt by the chicken coop door for the goat sucker. In Honduras, farmers stopped calling the vet and started hanging charms on their gates. In Colombia, parents warned their children not to stay out after dusk or the chupacabra will come sniffing. The creature no longer had to appear. Its reputation did all the work. But just because it had become folklore didn't mean the reports stopped. Oh no, they just took on a different tone. Instead of breathless phone calls to radio stations, it became smartphone footage. Instead of eyewitness drawings, it was Facebook posts with grainy thumbnails and captions like, "What is this?" You'd scroll past, roll your eyes, maybe even chuckle. But then, just before sleep, you'd remember the shape, how it didn't quite look like any animal you knew. And for a moment, you'd wonder. In South Carolina, a woman found her dogs barking violently at the edge of her field. When she stepped out, she saw a thin, gray creature standing on two legs. Long arms, no fur, just skin. It blinked once and vanished into the brush. She didn't take a picture. She didn't tell anyone for a week. But she still won't walk that edge of the property anymore, even in daylight. In El Salvador, a group of teens dared each other to spend the night in an old mango grove. They laughed, recorded TikToks, shared stories. Then the air changed. No sound, no insects, just a slow humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Their phones glitched, flashlights flickered, and when the batteries came back to life, two of their backpacks were torn open. One had a strange, needle-thin hole in the fabric. Nothing else was missing, just a whisper of something having passed through. Stories like this began to take on a new flavor. They weren't about trying to prove the chupacabra anymore. They were about feeling it, sensing it, that prickle at the back of your neck when the woods go still, that weird coppery smell that comes and goes on moonless nights, that shape at the edge of your headlights that looks almost canine until it stands up. And for every report, there's always the same question. Couldn't it just be a coyote? Sure, maybe. But then there's always something that doesn't add up. The way the animal moved, the eyes, the wounds, the complete lack of blood, and most of all, the silence. Always that eerie, pre-dawn quiet, like the land itself is holding its breath. One story, often told and retold, came from a small town in Panama. A boy woke up to see something crouched at the end of his bed. Not inside, of course, just outside the window. Its face was pressed to the screen eyes, too big, skin too pale. It didn't move when he screamed, just slowly backed away. And by the time his parents got there, all that remained was a pair of damp prints on the sill. Half reptile, half human, still wet. No one could agree if that was the chupacabra, but no one offered a better answer. And so it was added to the growing pile of tales. 1,000 fragments of something real, or at least real enough. Meanwhile, the internet gave the creature a second life. Cryptid fans debated the two forms, Puerto Rican versus Texan. Some even created timelines, suggesting different generations of the beast. Others theorized it was never one creature, but a speciesa hidden predator with regional variants, like jaguars in the jungle or coyotes in the desert. Still others went further. What if the chupacabra is a warning system, that when it appears, it signals imbalance, ecological strain, spiritual unrest, that it shows up in waves not because it travels, but because we awaken it, with our stories, with our fear, with our need to explain the things we can't fully see. And in that sense, the chupacabra becomes more than a creature. It becomes a mirror, a way to look at our world and say, something's not right. Maybe the power's out. Maybe the animals are acting strange. Maybe you heard something last night that you can't quite explain. So you light a candle, lock the back door, and whisper, just to yourself, Chupacabra, just in case. Now let's visit a quiet little town tucked deep into the Sonoran Desert, the kind of place where time moves slow and the wind carries dust and secrets in equal measure. Folks there will tell you they've seen things, heard things, and one man, in particular, will never forget that night. His name was Manuel, rancher, early riser, the kind of guy who didn't rattle easy, not even when the coyotes got close to the calves. But this was different. It started with a smell, that same copper tang that others described, like warm metal, like blood on a hot coin. Then came the silence. No owls, no bugs, not even the wind, just stillness. And in that stillness, Manuel stepped out onto his porch with a flashlight and saw something in the distance. A shape, just at the edge of the floodlight, low to the ground, hairless, long tail curling behind it like a question mark. Its eyes caught the light, but didn't reflect it. They absorbed it. He didn't chase it, just watched. And as it turned its head slow, deliberate, like it knew he was watching, it bared its teeth. Not in aggression, in recognition, like a dog might do when it sees its owner, or prey. The next morning, 3 goats were gone. No tracks, no broken fence, just 3 long, dry smears in the dirt, leading away into the rocks. Manuel sold the ranch a year later. He won't talk about it anymore. That story is one of dozens that circulate quietly in places where the Chupacabra has become more than a monster. It's a presence, a word you don't say unless you mean it, a shape that moves between the stories of farmers, children, and night watchers. And each time it appears, it picks up a little more detail, a little more clarity. That's the strange thing about modern legends. They coalesce. They start as whispers, murmurs, but over time, the details start to align. The creature walks with a certain gait. Its eyes have a certain depth. The silence it brings has a rhythm all its own. It becomes more real than reality, because it's carried not just in facts, but in patterns. And those patterns, they don't go away. Even skeptics, when pressed, will admit the pattern is odd. Why do so many attacks share the same signs? Why do the deaths keep happening decades after the legend was born? Why is it always the same profile? Small rural towns, moonless nights, drained blood, no struggle. You can explain 1 or 2 away as coincidence, maybe even a dozen, but hundreds? That's harder to ignore. And then there are the dreams. Yes, the dreams. Because in recent years, people have started reporting something new. Not just sightings, not just attacks, but visitations. They wake in the middle of the night, no sound, no lights, and feel watched. Some say they see a figure outside the window. Others say it's already inside, standing in the corner, not moving, just watching. Thin limbs, pale eyes, a mouth that doesn't quite close all the way. And when they turn on the light, nothing, just a faint smell, like metal and soil, and a mark, sometimes on the glass, sometimes on their skin, a small bruise, a thin line, 2 dots. Of course, dreams are dreams. No one's saying the Chupacabra is haunting bedrooms now, but it's strange, isn't it, that so many of these dreams come from people who've never heard the legend before? Tourists, students, new arrivals, people who couldn't point to Puerto Rico on a map. And yet, they dream the same thing, the same eyes, the same silence. It's as if the story is spreading sideways now, not just through news or television, but through our imaginations, through our sleep, through that part of the mind that catalogs fear and gives it form. And if the Chupacabra is feeding on anything, maybe it isn't blood anymore. Maybe it's attention. You think about that sometimes, lying awake after the lights go out. How folklore is a living thing, how it moves through culture like a vine, twisting itself around your memories. How a single word, Chupacabra, can freeze you in place, even if you've never seen a single goat go missing. Because stories like this don't need proof. They just need possibility. And that's something the Chupacabra has in endless supply. There's an old man who lives in the hills outside Durango, Mexico. He doesn't say much, doesn't go into town unless he absolutely has to. The locals know him only as Tío León, and he's one of the last people still alive who claims to have seen the Chupacabra before the world gave it a name. He tells the story in bits, not because he's trying to be mysterious, but because the memory comes in fragments like light flickering through leaves. It was in the late 1980s, he says, before anyone had heard of El Chupacabra, before the spines and the bloodless goats. Back then, He was working a stretch of land near the edge of a dry arroyo. Livestock was healthy, weather was good, until one night. He was bringing in a stubborn calf just after sunset when he heard a noise behind him. Not a growl, not a hiss, a whine, high-pitched, like radio static mixed with a baby's cry. When he turned, he saw something crouched low on a rock outcrop. Grayish skin, spindly arms, eyes that didn't glow exactly, but throbbed like embers on the edge of dying. It didn't attack. It just watched. And then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared down the gully. The next morning, one of his goats was gone. No blood, no trail, just a cracked fence post and a strange indentation in the dust. Like a tripod leg, he says. Not a paw, not a hoof, something else. He didn't tell anyone for years, not until the name Chupacabra started showing up in newspapers. And even then, he didn't think it was the same thing. Too many spikes, too many fangs. His creature was simpler, cleaner, smarter, and maybe that's the most unsettling idea of all, that the Chupacabra didn't start as a monster, that it's something we've shaped, because the more people saw it, the more it seemed to change. What began as a tall, thin, near-alien figure in Puerto Rico soon morphed into a mange-covered beast in Texas, then into dreamlike shadows in Guatemala, then into glowing eyes in roadside dashcam footage in Argentina. It never stayed still, its edges blurred. A few cryptid researchers have pointed out how eerily responsive the Chupacabra seems to be, like it's reading us. The first sightings came when alien paranoia was high. X-Files, Roswell rehashes, abduction reports on every tabloid. So, the Chupacabra looked like a gray alien on legs. Then came fear of genetic mutation, bioweapons, secret labs. Suddenly, it had surgical precision, cold methods, clinical kills. Then came rural fierce coyotes, wild dogs, disease. And just like that, the Chupacabra had fur, claws, and mange. It adapts, not just to environments, but to moods. And that raises a very odd, very unsettling question. What if the Chupacabra isn't one creature? What if it's a phenomenon? A pattern we summon when conditions are just right? An echo of the things we fear most in a given moment? Maybe it's a mirror that changes depending on who's holding the flashlight. Maybe it's not even physical, just a kind of psychic scar. There's a legend among the Huichol people, an old one, older than the Spaniards, that tells of a creature called Kakuyari. It's said to appear only when harmony in the land is broken. It drinks not just blood, but memory. It feeds on imbalance. No one's ever drawn it, because it never looks the same twice. Sound familiar? Some theorists now believe the Chupacabra is our modern Kakuyari, a shapeshifter born not of forest or sky, but of collective unease. An emotional consequence that takes on a body only when too many people begin to imagine it. If that's true, then it doesn't live in any jungle or cave. It lives in us. Of course, not everyone buys into that. Many still think it's just a weird coyote, or a hoax, or something born from lonely places and overactive imaginations. But even those people, they don't walk alone at night without checking the fences. They still glance at the tree line if their animals are acting strange. They still pause when they hear that hum in the distance. Because even if you don't believe in the Chupacabra, there's a part of you that remembers it, somewhere deep, somewhere old. And that's how stories survive, not just through books or interviews, but through that hush that settles across the world right before something changes. That second before the flashlight flickers. That chill you feel when your dog starts growling at the wall. You don't need to see the Chupacabra to know it's near. You just need to listen and wait. There's a quiet, winding road in the outskirts of Lajas, Puerto Rico. It's the kind of road where your headlights only seem to light up about 5 feet ahead of you, and everything beyond the curve just dissolves into darkness. Folks around there don't like driving it after midnight. Not because of potholes, not because of animals crossing, but because, so they say, that's where the Chupacabra crosses too. One woman, Rosa, swears she saw it just after 2 a.m. She was coming home from her sister's house, going slow around a curve, when something stepped into her high beams. It wasn't big, maybe 4 feet tall, but it stood on 2 legs. Its arms were too long, its skin looked gray and tight, and its mouth, Like a zipper opening the wrong way, she said. It didn't run. It didn't even seem surprised. It just watched her. And then leapt upward, not across, and vanished into the trees. There were no tracks. No fur, no blood, no sound. Just a lingering smell of something electric, like ozone and rust. She drove home without blinking once. Now, here's the strange thing about places like Lajas. They accumulate stories. They don't just have one Chupacabra tale. They have dozens, each one slightly different. Sometimes the creature has red eyes. Sometimes they're black. Sometimes it crawls. Sometimes it flies. Sometimes it just watches. But no one ever says it isn't real. They just argue about the details. It's in these places, quiet towns, mountain valleys, desert fringes where the Chupacabra feels most alive. Not because of sightings, but because of the space it holds. A space between belief and disbelief, between science and folklore, between what we know and what we fear. Skeptics often ask, if the Chupacabra is real, why hasn't it ever been caught? But believers flip the question, if it was caught, would it still be the Chupacabra? See, the Chupacabra isn't just a cryptid. It's a concept, one that doesn't want to be caged, one that lives in that flicker between imagination and shadow. And it changes people. Once someone sees it or thinks they've seen it, they don't come back the same. They lock their doors tighter. They talk a little softer at night. They pause when their animals act strangely, even if it's probably nothing. Because it only takes one moment of uncertainty to shift the way you see the world. Like the man in El Paso who claimed he saw a Chupacabra feeding on a deer carcass, except when he got closer, the thing looked straight at him and whistled. Not a bird call, not random, a human-style whistle. 3 notes. And then it was gone. He doesn't hunt anymore. Says the woods are too full of thinking things now. Or the boy in Belize who followed what he thought was a stray dog into the sugarcane fields. He was 9, gone for hours. When they found him, he wasn't hurt, just cold, dazed. He kept asking why the dog had fingers. He doesn't speak anymore. Draws a lot, though. Mostly long, thin animals with sad eyes and too many teeth. These are the stories that don't make it into documentaries or news specials. They're too soft, too strange. They don't fit the monster hunter narrative. But they matter, because they show how the Chupacabra doesn't just live out there in the brush, in the trees, in the chicken coops. It lives in here, in the mind, in the places we don't talk about in daylight. Maybe that's why it endures. Because it isn't just about blood or teeth or mystery. It's about transformation. What happens to a person once they've touched the edge of something unexplainable? How it reshapes your certainty, your patterns, your trust in what the world is supposed to be. People say belief in monsters is childish, but maybe not believing in them is just a kind of numbness. A refusal to admit that sometimes, just sometimes, there are things moving at the edge of the woods. Things that don't want to be found. Things that choose to stay legend. And sometimes, that's exactly where they belong. Right there in the dark. Just watching. You're lying in bed now, aren't you? Listening a little more closely than usual. Not because you're scared, no. Not quite. But because some part of you remembers what it felt like to be told a story that didn't just end, it followed you. Like a shadow that stretches just a little longer than your body. Like a whisper that takes a moment too long to fade. That's the Chupacabra's gift. Not terror, but presence. There's a theory, one of the older ones, rarely spoken aloud, that the Chupacabra appears most often in times of transition. Shifts in the weather. Shifts in population. Shifts in belief. Times when things aren't quite one thing or the other. And maybe that's why it haunts the edge of rural towns. The moments between dusk and full dark. The boundary between farm and forest. Between man and myth. Because the Chupacabra is the in-between. In recent years, researchers, not cryptozoologists, but anthropologists, have begun to study the legend not as biology, but as cultural weather. They don't ask, what is it? They ask, what does it mean? Why does this story rise up in the Americas, particularly in places that have known both colonization and erasure? Why blood? Why goats? Why silence? One researcher from a university in Brazil posited that the Chupacabra is a grief construct. a being born from the quiet sorrow of vanishing ways of life. As traditional farming collapses under globalization, as small towns get hollowed out, something remains. Something that drains. And so the Chupacabra is born, not as predator, but as metaphor, the quiet emptiness left behind. Others have challenged that idea, saying it's too poetic, too tidy. They point out that many cultures across the globe have blood-drinking creatures. The Aswang in the Philippines, the Strigoi in Romania, the Lamashtu in ancient Mesopotamia. So maybe it's just a primal archetype, a fear baked into our DNA, fear of being drained, of being used, fear of the dark. But then you find the stories that don't quite fit any model. Like the girl in Ecuador who said the Chupacabra didn't take her goat, it protected it. She claims a man tried to steal one of their animals during a drought, and before he could, something tackled him in the dust and chased him off. When her father checked the field, he found no tracks, just claw marks on a stone wall and a tuft of skin. Not fur, not hair, skin, like something molted. She still keeps that goat. It's old now, and blind in one eye, but she says it's safe, because the thing in the hills knows it. Then there are the sounds. Across every region, Puerto Rico, Texas, Honduras, Chile, people report the same strange sound just before a sighting. Not a howl, not a screech, but a buzzing, like electricity through gravel, like wires vibrating too tight. Some say it's a warning, others say it's communication. Still, others think it's the creature's way of reorienting itself, because it doesn't quite belong here, because it's still learning how to be here. And that's the final layer of the Chupacabra legend, the idea that it isn't native, that it was either brought here or created here by accident. Experiments, interdimensional leaks, even, in one obscure theory, a creature born from human thought, Alonia tulpa, brought into existence by too much belief. Think of it like this. What if we wanted something to fear? What if we whispered about it enough, described it in enough detail, built shrines to it in the form of memes, movies, and grainy photos? What if it heard us and decided to become real? It's not such a crazy idea. After all, we've given it everything a myth needs: a name, a look, a sound, a purpose, a place to live. It's no wonder the Chupacabra shows up when it does. We invited it. So now, here we are, dozens of stories later, across countries, across decades. And what have we learned? Not the truth, exactly, but something more important. We've learned the contours of the Chupacabra, the shape it makes in a story, the gap it fills in a quiet night, the way it hums just below the ordinary, and how, if you're very still, if you listen between the beats of your heart, you might just hear that familiar buzz again. Closer this time, but never quite close enough to prove. Just enough to remember. Imagine this. You're driving down a back road in rural Texas, the kind where the trees huddle a little too close to the shoulder and the radio cuts out for no reason. It's late, well past midnight, and the only light comes from your headlights and a pale slice of moon. And then, just up ahead, something darts across the road. Low, fast, too big for a raccoon, too fluid for a dog. You slam the brakes, your heart jumps. The beam of your lights catches nothing but dust and branches. But still, something's wrong. You can feel it. The road's gone quiet again. And the air, that same copper tang, that's how it often starts. Not with a scream or a shriek, but with a gap. A blank space where noise and logic used to be. And the Chupacabra? It slides right in. In many stories, the creature isn't aggressive at first. It's curious, calculating. It watches before it acts, which makes you wonder, what is it looking for? Why does it sometimes take animals, and sometimes just leave marks? Why do some people feel sick after a sighting? Why do others dream of it for weeks afterward? Some researchers think it's a psychic predator, not just hunting for blood, but for fear, for energy. They compare it to ancient lore about incubi, or shadow people, or night hags that sit on your chest while you sleep. Creatures that feed not on the body, but on the aura. A few radical theories even suggest the Chupacabra is tied to magnetism, that it appears along ley lines, those invisible energy grids some believe crisscross the earth. One Chupacabra investigator, a former geologist turned cryptid chaser, mapped out sightings over a 20-year span. And guess what? Most of them clustered near places with odd magnetic readings, where compasses twitch, where birds avoid flying, where power flickers. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the creature needs something else from this world, something humming just below the surface. There's also a pattern in the timing. Most sightings happen during transitional weather, not during deep winter or summer, but between the first fogs of spring, the cooling rains of autumn, nights when the air feels thin, like the world hasn't quite decided what it wants to be. Just like the creature itself, neither fully animal nor spirit, neither past nor future, just now, just this moment. One of the more unsettling stories comes from a small town in Nicaragua. A teenage girl named Clarabelle woke to find her little brother standing at the window, unmoving. He said he heard something calling to him, not with words, with a hum. She looked outside and saw something, a shape just past the tree line, too tall, wrong posture, eyes like holes punched in a photograph. They turned the lights on. Gone. Next morning, a dead hen in the yard. No blood, just two tiny pinholes in its neck. Her brother still won't talk about that night, but he won't sleep facing the window anymore. Then there's the tale of a long-haul trucker passing through Nevada. He stopped at a rest area to check his rig and noticed paw prints in the dust. Except they weren't quite paw prints. Too narrow, too long, more like fingers. He heard a clicking sound behind him turned nothing, just shadows. But when he got back in the cab, there was a smear across the windshield. Not mud, not blood, something else, like static made solid. He drove for 9 hours without stopping once. And now, he only drives during daylight. Stories like these don't make the headlines, but they pile up. Little hints, little glimpses, each one adding to the contour of the Chupacabra. And that's what's so compelling. There's no definitive photo, no skeleton in a lab, no government file labeled confirmed. Just a shape, a behavior, a rhythm, a pulse beneath the world we think we know. And maybe that's enough. Because some things aren't meant to be caught. Some legends ask to remain blurry. If you saw the Chupacabra in broad daylight, photographed it clearly, measured its bones, what would be left? Not a mystery, just a specimen. And the thing about specimens, they stop being stories. But the Chupacabra, it thrives as a story. That's its habitat. Our imaginations, our fears, our late-night drives. It walks the same dirt roads we do just a few minutes ahead, always just out of reach, waiting for someone to whisper its name, to leave a chicken coop just slightly ajar, to pause at the window when the lights flicker, just long enough to let it in. Let's talk about a place known only to locals as La Quebrada Sin Nombre, the ravine without a name. It sits near the edge of a forgotten sugar plantation in rural Dominican Republic, the kind of place where even GPS gives up halfway. It's not marked on maps. There's no trail. And when you ask about it, most people just shake their heads and change the subject. But every few years, someone goes missing there. And every time, the goats start dying again. A local farmer named Esteban tells the story best. He remembers a night in 2004 when the valley below his home filled with fog. Thick, unnatural stuff. No forecast had predicted it. And just after midnight, the goats started crying. Not bleating. Crying. High-pitched, panicked, like they were being silenced as they screamed. By the time Esteban got to the pen, 4 were already down. The others pressed hard against the fence, trembling. And out past the trees, something crouched low, watching. Its eyes were narrow, focused. Esteban swears it had no mouth, just folds where one should be. They called in a vet. The police came, too. No signs of trauma. No wounds beyond the same 2 punctures. They said it was a dog, a raccoon, maybe even a snake bite. But Esteban still doesn't keep livestock anymore. Not since that night. Not since the fog. Places like La Quebrada Sin Nombre dot the entire landscape of Latin America. Pockets where people have quietly adapted to the legend. Homes with iron charms above the doorway. families that sweep salt across thresholds every Thursday, children told never to whistle after sunset, not because of religion, but because of the pattern, because they've seen what happens when those rules are broken, and because even if they've never seen it themselves, they know someone who has. A man in Costa Rica claimed his grandmother once caught a chupacabra mid-attack. She struck it with a broom. It shrieked like steam escaping a kettle and leapt over a 10-foot fence. She never raised chickens again, but she did keep the broom, hung it above her kitchen door until the day she died. These days, stories like that are survival lore. They don't need to be proven. They're not waiting for scientists. They're practiced, remembered, lived, and with every generation, the chupacabra becomes less of a legend and more of a local fact. Like droughts, like power outages, like the neighbor who always leaves his radio on too loud. It's become part of the rhythm, and not just in Spanish-speaking countries. The chupacabra has made its way into small towns across the US, the Philippines, even parts of India. The name travels, even if the creature changes. In some places, it has wings. In others, it slithers. One account from Mississippi described it as a hairless monkey with the face of a bat. But always the result is the same. Dead animals, no blood, no noise, and that lingering question, how did it get past the fence? That's the thing about the chupacabra. It doesn't break in. It just appears, as if it's always been there, as if it was waiting. Some folklorists now refer to it as a migratory myth, a legend that doesn't stay rooted, but flows across borders like weather. It doesn't require temples or prayers, just a dark road, an animal pen, a mind open enough to feel the static change. And for every story that fades, another takes its place. Like the woman in Arizona who swears the creature stalked her RV for 3 nights. Or the fisherman in Belize who found a nest of feathers with no body, no bones, just 2 clean punctures in the dirt where something heavy had landed. Or the hiker in the Andes who heard breathing in a cave, deep, labored, not human, not animal, just present and waiting. These aren't the kinds of stories that get documentaries. They're too scattered, too weird, but taken together, they form a constellation, a thread through time and land, an outline of something ancient, patient, still walking the edges of our world. And you're part of it now. You've heard the hum, seen the red eyes in your mind, imagined the chill of breath on your neck in a place with no wind. You know the shape it makes when it crouches in the dark. You know, even if you won't admit it, even if you'll laugh it off in the morning, somewhere, something heard you listening, and now, it's listening back. Sometimes, the stories don't come from terrified farmers or late-night hikers. Sometimes, they come from people you'd least expect: scientists, park rangers, even the occasional law enforcement officer who's seen too much to laugh it off anymore. Like Officer Ramirez from southern Arizona. He doesn't talk about it often, not in uniform anyway. But once, over coffee at a roadside diner, he told a quiet, measured story about something that happened near the border. It was just after a storm. Power was still out in a few sectors. Livestock reports were coming in: goats, chickens, even a few calves killed in strange ways. No blood, no dragging. Just clean, cold corpses with the same impossible punctures. So he went to check one of the ranches alone. He found the pen door open, but not broken. The latch had been turned from the inside. The dirt was soft from the rain. There were prints, but not paw prints, more like talons, 3-pronged, deep. And in the far corner of the property, something moved. Low to the ground. Too smooth. Too fast. He only saw it for a second. But he hasn't walked that side of the ranch since. He ended the story with a sip of coffee and a shrug. Maybe it was just a mountain lion, he said. But I've seen mountain lions, and that wasn't one. The chupacabra has a way of showing itself to those who aren't looking for it. And that's what makes the legend so unsettling. It doesn't hide from the experts. It waits for them. There's a theory of the newer ones that suggests the chupacabra might not be a living thing in the traditional sense at all. That it's a kind of anomaly, a slip, an event. That what we're seeing isn't an animal, but a glitch in whatever this world really is. An echo of a thing that doesn't belong here. A ripple in the fabric. That's why it leaves no DNA. That's why it's never caught. That's why it's always seen at night, in fog, in that quiet pause between storm and silence. Because maybe it's not coming from out there. Maybe it's leaking in. Supporters of this theory point to strange electrical activity. Every time the Chupacabra is near, devices fail. Batteries drain. Animals act wrong, as if something is bending. Not just the rules of nature, but of reality. They call it a myth-tech entity, part folklore, part environmental event. Not alive, not dead, just happening. It sounds outlandish, sure, until you listen to the old man in Guatemala who says the air turned blue the night his chickens vanished. Or the camper in Tennessee who found her digital watch rewound by 3 hours after hearing something breathing just beyond her tent. Or the security guard in Brazil whose flashlight wouldn't work until he left the woods. Only then did it blink back to life. Even skeptics are starting to admit there's something going on. Maybe not a monster, but a phenomenon. One that follows patterns, but resists explanation. One that feels old and new at the same time. One that doesn't care whether you believe or not. And here's the really strange part. For many who've experienced it, whatever it is, they don't report fear. At least, not the scream and run kind. Instead, they report a kind of awe. A moment where the world felt thin, unsteady, like the curtain had been pulled back just for a breath. And what they saw staring back wasn't just a creature, it was a presence, a watcher, something that's always been there, just waiting for us to notice. Because the Chupacabra isn't a jump scare, it's a slow realization, a story that sneaks in between thoughts, a hum in the bones, a shadow where there should be none. And once you've felt it, you start to understand why no one ever catches it. Because maybe catching it isn't the point. Maybe the whole purpose is to remind us that the world is still wild, that not everything can be tagged, bagged, and explained away. That, somewhere out there beneath the trees, behind the barn, just beyond the last streetlight, something unspoken still moves, waiting, watching, and wondering which story it will step into next. There's something about old border towns, those little outposts scattered across the scrub and the dust, where time seems to snag on rusted fences and forgotten road signs. Places where legends don't just survive, they settle in, become part of the architecture. One of these places sits at the edge of southern Texas, a small, sun-baked town with no traffic lights and more goats than people. It's where an old widow named Alma still leaves out a dish of salt water on the porch each Thursday evening. She won't say why, but everyone in town knows. She once saw it. It was the summer of '96, sweltering heat, no rain. Her animals were restless skittish in ways she'd never seen. They refused to go near the western fence, near the mesquite grove. Then one night, something woke her. No sound, no light, just a feeling, like the world had tilted slightly off balance. She looked out her window and saw a shape thin, hunched, moving in short, deliberate motions. The goats didn't scream. They didn't even move. They just watched as the thing passed between them, almost gently. By morning, 2 were gone. Not a drop of blood. No prints. Just salt crusted on the ground where the dish had spilled. And that's the kind of detail that slips through the cracks in most retellings. The rituals. Because folklore doesn't just create monsters. It creates responses. Salt. Charms. Ash lines across doorways. Nails hammered into tree trunks to pin the shadow. These traditions predate the name Chupacabra by centuries. They come from older things, deeper things, things that didn't have names but always had teeth. In northern Peru, farmers still burn bundles of dried herbs during a new moon, whispering prayers not to God but to what walks in silence. In Panama, some leave raw garlic at the corners of their fields not because of vampires, but because El Ladrón sin sombra, the thief without a shadow, dislikes the scent. In Colombia, fishermen throw a bit of blood into the river before setting sail, saying it's better to offer something small than lose something bigger. All of them, talking about something just out of frame. Not quite the same, but not quite different either. Maybe the Chupacabra isn't one creature. Maybe it's a name, a stand-in, a modern title for an ancient guest. The kind of thing we've always known is out there, even if we change what we call it every few generations. And when you think about it that way, the goat sucker moniker starts to feel almost gentle, almost quaint, because some versions of the tale go further. Say, it doesn't just drain animals. Say it takes things from the land itself. The fertility of the soil, the sleep of newborns, the memories of the old. There are whispers that entire families have moved after a visit, not because they were harmed, but because something left, something vital, and in its place, just fog and dreams that go nowhere. It's stories like these that don't make it into travel brochures, but they persist, passed down like warnings sewn into the hem of a nightgown. Don't walk barefoot at dusk. Don't whistle in the fog. Never, ever look out the window after hearing a low hum. Simple rules, protective measures, and yet each one comes from a place of knowledge. Not superstition, experience, because once someone's felt that silence, once they've stood alone in a field and known they weren't alone, they understand something most of us spend our lives trying to ignore, that there are things in this world that still belong to the dark, and sometimes they visit. So Alma still puts out her salt water. The kids in town still ride their bikes a little faster near the old grove. And the goats? They never go near the western fence anymore. Even after all these years, maybe it's all just coincidence. Maybe animals are just animals, and stories are just stories. But maybe the Chupacabra still walks between fence posts and roadside ditches, waiting for the next name to be whispered, the next silence to enter, the next dish of salt to be left untouched. You ever notice how the Chupacabra never really leaves? It just fades, a little, slips into the background noise of life. It's never truly gone, it's just waiting. Like a song you forgot you knew, until someone hums the first few notes and suddenly you remember every word. That's the rhythm of this legend. It ebbs and flows. And every few years, like clockwork, it surges. A new sighting, a fresh panic, another stretch of fence torn open and a goat found cold and dry. And just like that, it's back in the headlines. But only briefly, because the Chupacabra doesn't thrive on attention. It thrives on uncertainty. In 2007, a town in Texas caught national attention after a farmer claimed to have killed the creature. He even had the carcass long, hairless, sharp-toothed, and snarling even in death. They called in experts, ran tests, took photos. The verdict? Canine. Likely a coyote or feral dog with severe mange. Case closed. Or was it? Because others who saw the body in person said it didn't smell right. Said the bones were too long. Said the thing had no fear in its final moments. One local swears he saw it blink after it was declared dead. And when the body was shipped off for testing, the truck broke down outside of town. By morning, the carcass was missing. They said it was a mix-up, paperwork, storage error. But no one ever saw it again. And once again, the Chupacabra slipped back into the mist. Because it's not meant to be solved. Every time we get too close, it changes shape, dodges the lens, shifts the narrative. Because that's how stories survive. Not by being proven, but by being doubted. Even now, with all the science and tech at our fingertips, there's still a part of the world that feels untouched. Still a part of the human mind that believes in things with no place in textbooks. It's why we lock our doors, even when we live in the middle of nowhere. Why we pause at a strange noise in the attic, even though we know it's probably the wind. Why we keep our pets inside on foggy nights, just in case. We don't believe, exactly, but we don't not believe either. There's a boy in Argentina who's kept a journal since age 8. He's never seen the Chupacabra, but he's heard the stories. And every week, he draws a new version of it. One with wings, one with scales, one that's all shadows and teeth. His parents thought it was strange, until one morning, one of their chickens was found dead. No blood, just 2 tiny marks behind the neck. The boy didn't seem surprised. He just turned the page and began a new drawing, this one with eyes that glowed blue in the dark. Children, especially, seem attuned to the presence of the unexplained. They haven't been taught not to believe yet. They still trust their instincts. They still listen to the quiet between words. And many of them speak of the Chupacabra not as a monster, but as a visitor. Not evil, not kind, just curious. watching, waiting. There's something comforting about that, in a way, that we might be sharing this world with something older than our maps, that not everything has to fit neatly into charts and classifications. That mystery itself might be a kind of magic, a reminder that we haven't figured it all out. Not yet. The Chupacabra may never be captured, never be classified, never be labeled with a Latin name in a dusty museum, because that's not its role. It's not here to be understood. It's here to remind us of the edges, the blurry, shifting outlines of the known. So the stories keep coming, from every corner of the Americas, from dusty hills, flooded fields, tangled forests, and quiet backyards. And each one is a thread, woven into the ever-growing shape of the legend, a creature made not of fur and flesh, but of fear and fascination, and that uncanny sense that something is watching us back. You wouldn't think a creature like the Chupacabra would be the subject of academic papers, but it is. Tucked away in university archives, there are theses and dissertations written about it like it's a literary character. One folklorist called it a living parable of forgotten edges, and honestly, that's not far off. Because the more you study the Chupacabra, the more you realize it's not just about fear, it's about boundaries. The lines we draw between rural and urban, man and beast, old ways and new. And every time those lines blur, the Chupacabra steps in. It's not just Puerto Rico anymore, or Mexico, or Texas. Now there are reports in Florida, in Oregon, even parts of Canada, always at the outskirts, the edges of communities, the corners of the woods, the gaps in surveillance. You never hear about a Chupacabra in Times Square. But the outskirts of Saskatoon? That's another story. A woman living near a pine forest in British Columbia says she woke up to her dog growling at the window. She looked outside and saw a shape-long, limbed, hairless, with green eyes that didn't shine but swallowed light. The snow below it didn't crunch. It just settled. By the time she got outside, there was nothing. But the dog refused to go near the tree line for days. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter if that's true in the empirical sense. What matters is that someone believed it, felt it, lived it. Because these stories function like campfire smoke, they linger long after the flame dies. They sink into the fabric of a place. They stain the air. Now, in small towns across the Americas, you'll find murals of the Chupacabra, graffiti, stickers, kids trading cards and drawings of the thing with glowing fangs and red claws. It's entered the bloodstream of culture, no longer just a threat, but a symbol. Some view it as a metaphor for exploitation, a creature that comes in the night and drains you, just like systems, corporations, or colonizers have done to small towns for generations. Others see it as a guardian, weirdly enough, a being that punishes the greedy, that reminds humans not to get too comfortable, that keeps the balance between man and animal, civilization and chaos. Still, others don't theorize at all. They just leave food out at the edge of the woods, not because they expect a thank you, but because they know something passes through there from time to time, and it's better to be polite. In Panama, there's a story about a boy who disappeared for 2 nights in the jungle. When he came back, he wouldn't speak, just carried a smooth black stone in his hand. When asked where he'd been, he whispered only, "The thirsty one showed me the Red River." To this day, no one knows what that means. But the jungle behind their house remains untouched. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because that's what the Chupacabra teaches in its own strange way. Not just fear of the unknown, but respect for it. A willingness to admit that maybe we don't get to name and file away every creature in the world. Maybe some things aren't meant to be on camera. Maybe they thrive in whispers and flickering porch lights and the rustling of leaves that shouldn't be rustling. It's easy to forget in the glare of screens and schedules and data, but there's still wilderness out there. Still gaps. Still edges. And when you stand at the edge long enough, something eventually looks back. So keep telling the stories. Keep leaving out the saltwater bowls and locking your coop twice, even when you're sure you already did. Keep listening when your animals act strange. Not because you expect proof, but because this is how the legend lives. In gestures, in habits, in the little things we do when the wind shifts just a little too fast, when the fog rolls in thicker than it should, when we feel watched and can't explain why. There's something poetic about how the chupacabra lives on it in laboratories or museums, but in the margins. It's never the headline, never the center of attention, just a shadow in someone's story, a rumor, a pause in the conversation when the lights flicker. It's folklore with teeth, and no matter how many scientists label it a misidentified dog or how many reporters try to debunk it, the truth is, the legend only grows, not because it's proven, but because it's felt. In Puerto Rico, where it all began, people still talk about the first wave of sightings in the mid-1990s, like it just happened yesterday. Old newspaper clippings are pinned to the walls of barber shops. Local radio hosts still take midnight calls from people who swear they saw it dart across the road. And while some roll their eyes, others just nod slowly. They've heard the stories. They remember the goats, the silence, the way the dogs wouldn't bark that week. One woman, Mirda, remembers waking up to find her clothesline torn down and her neighbor's rooster lying stiff under the mango tree. No blood, no wounds, but the look in its eyes, wide, frozen, like it had seen something that unmade it. And ever since, Mirda refuses to hang clothes outside after dusk. Not out of superstition, out of experience. Then there are the crossover sightings, where witnesses describe something that seems almost like the chupacabra, but not quite. A man in South Carolina reported a tall, dog-like creature with no fur and backward-bending legs standing still in a cornfield. A couple in El Salvador said they saw a figure crouched by the roadside with a row of spines down its back and eyes that blinked sideways. In each case, the details differ, but the feeling? Always the same. The hush, the charge in the air, the knowledge that this wasn't supposed to be seen. That's part of what keeps the legend alive, variation. If every chupacabra looked the same, acted the same, followed a neat little rulebook, we'd file it away. We'd stop looking. But instead, the creature shifts, takes on just enough familiarity to make us believe, and just enough strangeness to keep us from being sure. Even cryptozoologists, those fringe biologists who study creatures the rest of science laughs, treat the chupacabra with a kind of reverence. They've got databases, maps, interviews logged over decades. But the deeper they dig, the more elusive it becomes. One of them, a man named Julio, once said, "Trying to track the chupacabra is like trying to follow fog. You feel like you're getting closer, and then it disappears through your fingers." He doesn't hunt it anymore. He listens now, and he waits. Meanwhile, the rest of us carry the legend forward in our own ways. A sketch here, a short story there, a spooky podcast, a bedtime whisper between cousins during a sleepover. Did you know the chupacabra was spotted right here? And suddenly, the legend has a new home, a new heartbeat, because that's what stories do. They travel. They shape themselves to fit new fears, new landscapes. Maybe in the 1800s, it was called something else. Maybe in 2050, it'll wear a completely different face. But the feeling it carries, that'll never change. The tingle at the back of your neck, the second glance out the window, the moment when your flashlight flickers and you wonder. The chupacabra doesn't need us to believe in it all the time. Just long enough. Just enough for the legend to bloom again. And again. And again. Because the world will never run out of shadows. Or blood, or silence. So if you ever find yourself on a dusty back road, if your radio dies suddenly and the goats start making that sound you've never heard before, if the air grows thick and the trees fall silent, you'll know. It's near. Maybe not right there. Maybe not tonight. But soon. And when it comes, it won't knock. It never has. Let's take a moment to talk about silence. Not the peaceful kind, the hush of snowfall or the stillness just before sleep. No, this is the other kind. The silence that doesn't feel natural, the kind that wraps around you too tight. That hums in your ears even when there's nothing making noise. That makes you realize the birds have stopped singing. It's the kind of silence that comes before. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might just find yourself standing in the middle of it. The chupacabra's silence. That's how the stories often begin. A hunter in the forests of Guatemala. A farmer in the Dominican hills. A teen walking home from a bonfire in New Mexico. They all describe it the same way. Everything just stopped. No wind. No bugs. No footsteps, just that eerie pressure, like being underwater. It's almost like the Chupacabra steals sound, takes it from the world before it steps through, like it doesn't want to be interrupted. And then, a flash of movement, a hum, a prickle along the spine, and something gone before you can fully turn to see it. All that's left behind is a fence left ajar, an animal lying strangely still, and a feeling that something passed through you. In one chilling story from Veracruz, a night guard at a sugar plantation described waking to find the floodlights flickering. He walked the grounds. Everything was quiet, too quiet. And then he saw them 6 goats, lying in a perfect circle. No blood, no marks, but their eyes wide open, staring at the same point in the sky. He never found what they were looking at, but he hasn't worked a night shift since. That's the kind of story people whisper around here. The kind that doesn't make it into the papers, but everyone knows it, even if they won't admit it in daylight. Because what scares people most about the Chupacabra isn't just what it does, it's what it means. It's a reminder that we don't control everything, that our fences and floodlights and technology can't stop everything from crossing the threshold. That something ancient still has permission to walk the earth from time to time. Something that doesn't care about your schedule, your cameras, your disbelief. It just arrives. And that's why the Chupacabra is more than just a monster tale. It's a ritual, a communal remembering, a strange, shared heartbeat among people who've never met but who all remember that night when the dogs wouldn't bark, or the flashlight died, or the goats went quiet and wouldn't go near the edge of the trees. It's easy to scoff, sure, to chalk it up to wild dogs or heat stroke or vivid dreams, but deep down, you know better. You felt it too. That little shiver when your porch light flickers for no reason. That itch at the back of your neck when the air goes too still. That quiet voice in your head that says, "Don't look out the window just yet." We've tried to cage the Chupacabra in facts, to pin it down with maps and charts and DNA reports, but it keeps slipping through. Because maybe it's not meant to be studied. Maybe it's meant to be sensed. And when you lean into that mystery, when you allow yourself to listen for the hum, to respect the silence, it starts to make sense. Not in a scientific way, in a human way. We are creatures of story, and this is one of our oldest shapes. A thing in the dark that comes without warning, that takes, then vanishes, leaving behind only quiet and the chill of something remembered. So next time your flashlight flickers for no reason, next time your dog growls at nothing, next time you find your livestock staring at a fence as if someone is just on the other side, don't panic. Just be still, be respectful, and maybe, just maybe, the silence will pass you by. You know what's funny? People always want to know what the Chupacabra is. They want a species, a name, something with Latin roots and an entry in a field guide. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's not about what the Chupacabra is. Maybe it's about why it shows up. Because if you look at the patterns, not just the deaths or the sightings, but the timing, you'll start to notice something strange. It always appears when people stop paying attention. Go back through the stories, and you'll find it. Quiet towns distracted by political unrest, families grieving, communities struggling with change, times when people are vulnerable, distracted, edges fraying. And then, the goats go silent. The fences break. The air thickens. The Chupacabra walks through the gap. It's almost like it senses when the world forgets to be careful, when we let our guard down, when the routines slip, when we forget the stories, and that's when it strikes not just at livestock, but at memory itself, as if to say, "You forgot about me? Let me remind you." In that way, it's like a folkloric immune system, a warning signal, a reset button, a way of dragging our attention back to the dark edges of Thingstow, the places we usually ignore. A retired anthropologist once said something that stuck with me. The Chupacabra exists because it has to. Every culture needs a beast just beyond the fence. It's not about the blood. It's about the presence. The idea that something wild still roams. That nature hasn't been fully domesticated. That mystery still breathes just past the cornfield. And that's what makes the Chupacabra so powerful. It doesn't need a body to be real. It just needs to be possible. just believable enough to make us hesitate before walking into the fog. Even now, in the age of doorbell cams and GPS and 24-hour everything, the Chupacabra slips through. You can't geotag it. You can't live stream it. It won't leave footprints in your digital dust. But it leaves something else. Doubt. A hairline fracture in your reality. A flicker of something primal. A pulse of maybe. That's why the kids still draw it. Why the elders still warn each other with hushed voices and sideways glances. Why the stories don't die. Because they're useful. They remind us that we are not alone. Not entirely in control. Not above the old ways just because we've got smartwatches. The Chupacabra isn't waiting to be captured. It's waiting to be remembered. To be whispered about. Dreamed of. Feared. Just enough to keep the balance. Not too much. Just enough. So if you ever feel like something is just outside, not threatening, not friendly, just there, don't ignore it. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a trick of the fog. Maybe it's just your mind filling in blanks. Or maybe it's the Chupacabra. And maybe, just maybe, it came because the world forgot to leave the porch light on. Either way, offer it respect. That's all it asks. No flashlights. No traps. Just a quiet nod to the night. A whispered story shared by candlelight. Because in the end, that's what keeps it at bay. Not fear. Not fences. Just the story itself. You tell it. You pass it on. And in doing so, you hold the darkness at a comfortable distance. So here we are, friend, 24 sections in, and the Chupacabra still hasn't let you go. Oh, it's been kind lurking just beyond the edge of your imagination, never too close, never too far. But now, in this final stretch, it's time to take a breath, to turn around and look at the path you've walked, the stories you've heard, the eyes in the dark you've almost seen, from the hills of Puerto Rico to the forests of Oregon, from fog-choked roads to chicken coops drained dry. The Chupacabra leaves behind a trail not just of mystery, but of questions. What is it, really? A cryptid? A curse? A biological anomaly? A metaphor for forgotten fears? Or something older? Something nameless? Something that doesn't care what we call itonely that we remember? You've met farmers who stopped raising animals. Children who still draw its teeth in the margins of their notebooks. Old women who hang bundles of herbs with fingers that still shake. And those in cities who swear it brushed past them one foggy morning on the subway, just for a second. A thing so quiet, it could vanish behind a flickering street lamp. A thing so loud in the mind, it echoes long after it's gone. What began as a string of livestock deaths in the tropics became a legend with a passport spanning countries, languages, even continents. No longer just a monster, now a symbol of vigilance, of wilderness, of the fragile boundary between our world and something older than it. You know what's scarier than a monster you can't catch? A monster that doesn't want to be caught. One that exists because you believe it might. One that grows stronger every time you glance over your shoulder, just in case. One that doesn't want to kill you. Just remind you that you are not alone. And maybe that's the strangest comfort of all. That in this big, complicated, over-documented world, there's still something wild walking among us. Unnamed, unseen, unclaimed by science, but whispered about in the quietest hours of the night. So tonight, as you lie there in the hush, let your mind wander. Let it drift to the places beyond the porch light, to the edge of the woods, to the fence your animals won't cross. And if you hear something in the dark, a hum, a breath, a shiver of movement just beyond what's explainable, smile, because the Chupacabra hasn't forgotten you either. Wind down, 300 words. And now, as the story quiets and the shadows stretch a little longer across your room, it's time to let the night settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let your muscles soften. The Chupacabra, with all its prickling mystery and low-slung menace, fades now just a ripple in the dream space. Just a whisper caught between the trees. It isn't close, not really, not unless you invite it in. And tonight, you haven't. You've only listened. Tucked into blankets, eyes heavy, heart slow. There's nothing chasing you. No creature scratching at the window. No red eyes glowing just past the tree line. Just a story, told slowly, shared in warmth. And maybe that's all the Chupacabra really ever wanted. To be remembered. To be part of the night that lulls you to sleep. Let your thoughts drift like fog now, light and untethered. Let the old stories echo faintly, but comfortably, in the back of your mind. They belong to the world, not to fear, but to wonder. Because sleep, too, is a kind of mystery. And legends, like dreams, know how to wait in the dark, waiting not to harm you, but to walk beside you quietly, curiously as you drift into another world. Sweet dreams, wanderer, you made it through the night.